everybody.
We should be live.
I,
Hello,
I hit the
friends.
button. Hello, everybody, on this last day of March.
I know, right? I saw
Let's,
a post today that said March 97th. It seemed
yeah,
very appropriate.
yeah.
Anyway, hey guys, we're sorry we're a little late. We had some technical difficulties today, and we're ready to get started though. I'm Christina Previtt, the CEO of New Jersey Divorce Solutions, a law firm located in Edison, New Jersey, practicing exclusively divorce and family law. And joining me today is Jessica Sanchez, a New York real estate attorney. Thanks for joining me, Jessica.
Thanks for having me, Christina. It's a pleasure to be here. Hi, everybody out there.
Out in Corona land. What we wanted to talk about is for those people out there that have their house listed, or maybe they were under contract for sale, or if you were thinking of listing your house or maybe buying your dream house. If you are having an issue like that with the house, we wanted to talk to you about whether you could actually close. And I think the answer is yes, you can. So Jessica, share with us your intel on how we can actually do that.
Sure. Well, first off, right now, a lot of things are evolving very quickly in every discipline, every industry. So, I think the first week or so, as things progressed with the virus, people were trying to get ahead of a lot of the shutdowns, anticipating that things would start to become difficult in order to conduct business as usual. And then, by mid-March, when everything literally did shut down, there was a very big panic that struck not just in the supermarkets with toilet paper, but in my experience with the deals I had pending, I had, things at different points in the pipeline. So I had folks that were listing, I had folks that were on the market to buy, I had folks that had an accepted offer, folks that are already in contract, and those that already have received a commitment and then are just waiting on the clear to close to get to the closing table. And I got some very skittish buyers, some of whom pulled out before they were in contract. I got some very nervous sellers whose closing of one deal was going to affect their purchase in another deal, and a lot of frantic panic. The sky is falling sort of reactions from all across the board. And as a practitioner, our role is not exclusively legal based. A lot of times we also play psychologist, psychiatrist, and in this instance, parent. Calm
Yes.
down, take a breath. Let's just evaluate, and we're going to work within whatever the adjusted normalcy is, and continue to adjust. Courts shut down, then things were getting statutes of limitations were not being told initially, and now they are. So every day there was a new piece of information that we had to work with and work around or within. And in the world of real estate, those deals that I had already signed in contract, so locked in, the buyer agreed to buy this parcel of real property, the seller had agreed to sell it. Those deals, by and large, are still moving along, and I have two tentatively set up to close in April. So things are moving along. Lenders are still lending. Appraisers are still able to now remotely do some of their work in ways that has already been going on in states outside of New York well before this pandemic arose.
Are
So,
things moving a little more slowly than usual?
yes, you definitely have to pack your patience. You definitely have to appreciate and understand that timelines that we usually, our expectations of things do have to be adjusted. We do have to give a little bit more in terms of allowing people to get together, whether it's paperwork for underwriting or getting an appraiser to either, do a drive-by of the property or get permission to do something exclusively remotely by taking, data that might be available publicly, but them not physically going inside the home. Some appraisers are physically going inside homes still, but they're making sure absolutely nobody is in the house at the time they do it. They go in all of their gear, so they are being covered with their masks and their hands, and taking all necessary precautions. So we have to allow for that to happen. Okay. So as long as things are moving along, yes, they're not going to move necessarily at all due deliberate speed. People have to be safe, but by and large, they are still moving along. So yes, you have to pack your patience and anticipate that there's going to be some delay. There's uncertainty, sometimes in people's financial wherewithal. That causes things to kind of have to be reevaluated at certain steps in the process. And our job is, one, to just educate everybody from the real estate agent side to the title side to the lender side. Just try to keep everybody up to date with what is happening, and if there's a workaround that needs to occur, how we can achieve that. And most people are game for it, with the understanding that, yeah, we're going to have to do things a little bit outside of the ordinary for now. In some instances, quite frankly, I think that we were due for some changes in the practice of law in New York real estate specifically. Um, in other jurisdictions, remote closings have already been taking place. We're now, by executive order of the governor, allowed to remotely notarize, which we never were able to do beforehand. There
How do
are
you
some
do
things
that?
that,
How do
yeah,
you do that?
that we were not. Now it's set to expire, I think, April 18th. I'm sure that will be renewed at this point. But yeah, there were a lot of restrictions in New York that just don't seem practical, and in the digital age in which we already exist, seemed unnecessarily restrictive and very arcane. So
Yeah.
it's almost a good thing. I mean, when we have to think outside the box, ingenuity, really rises, and that's what we see happening here. So we're working our way through this, navigating with all of the restrictions and not imposing, any potential dangers on anyone, including myself, obviously. But we're getting there. We're getting through it.
So the actual closing doesn't have to happen at the closing table. It can
Correct.
happen remotely.
That's right. So we're doing things piecemeal, and this was already, it's not uncommon for a seller, for example, to not be physically present at the closing. I mean, either side could have signed a power of attorney and allowed me, for example, as the attorney for either side, to execute documents on their behalf. Now that there's remote notary, somebody can notarize a power of attorney to authorize me to do that. I can't do it if I'm going to be signing as agent, but we can find somebody else that can, with follow the steps that New York has prescribed for somebody that you don't know. And it's basically using a FaceTime, using a Zoom, using a WhatsApp, and having some, interaction with, looking at their license physically, having them sign the document, execute it, and then send it off digitally, and then we can notarize it and send it back simultaneously. So there are ways we can be creative. If somebody is outside of the state of New York, that presents different issues, because again, the document has to be notarized, and has to have, it has to conform to New York standards. But we're working through it. I have a client that's in the Philippines that's on lockdown until April 15th, was planning to be here physically for a closing. That's not going to happen at this point in time. So we're working within the confines of what, is allowed by the lender, by title, and by the state, and by the Philippines government as well, to figure out how we can still, make this all happen.
So now what about people that have entered into a contract right now? So they're locked in, and this is
Mhm.
buyer and seller. What happens if one of the parties now, because of what's happening, can they use this as a basis to get out of the contract? And I know it
Yeah,
depends what the contract
it
says.
depends. That's
Under
right.
usual circumstances.
It's a very case by case basis. The way that we analyze it. Obviously, some folks that are entering into contract now, post COVID pause. A lot of attorneys are putting specific, force majeure, exculpatory clauses that will say, if in the event that there is a material change in the financial condition of the borrower, they can get out and not lose their deposit, or, perhaps even more protective of the buyer. If for some reason they deem that they need to pull out, they can do so. Obviously, that's a negotiated term, but if you're already locked in, let's say COVID, you've signed contracts, you're moving along with the deal, and then as things unfolded, now you're in a precarious situation. You don't have job security. You don't have financial wherewithal to move forward. You're going to have to talk to your individual attorney to see what your contract specifically states, because everything gets negotiated. We all start with a form that we kind of understand we work from, and then we negotiate the terms. So it depends on what specifically your contract says and whether or not you have a good faith basis to pull out and not lose your deposit, because you can always pull out. It's what's the repercussion, right? Because if you
Yeah.
put down a down payment of 10% of the purchase price, that's what you risk to lose if you decide I can't move forward. The other ironic thing about this right now is, even let's say, hypothetically speaking, somebody would like to pull out because there are different pieces of this, right? Because if there's a mortgage contingency clause in the contract, which typically there is, and you have not yet received a commitment from your lender, and you do have a material adverse change to your financial position, presumably at that point the lender will deem you no longer qualified,
Like
and
if you moved
therefore,
your job.
right. And therefore, you won't get the commitment, at which point then you could go ahead and trigger that mortgage contingency clause and cancel, terminate the contract, and demand a return of your deposit. But if you're just kind of, and I tell all my clients, once you've signed this contract, you can't play cute and say, well, I signed the contract, it's a white house, but I want a yellow one and I changed my mind. No, that's not a good faith basis. But if you're not able to get the commitment, of course, then you have a basis to use that mortgage commitment contingency clause. But if you just feel nervous now, that you feel
Yes.
like you're using your reserves and you're not sure, that's not likely to be an area where you can delve in and say, well, I'm just not feeling comfortable anymore. um, what I was going to say is, the ironic thing right now is that courts are pretty much closed right now. So even if you wanted to get into that scuffle, and try to throw out, well, we're going to sue you, we're going to put a lis pendens on the house, all this and that, there's nowhere to go.
It's not going to happen immediately, but it can still
Right,
happen.
right. So you
So
kind
would you
of
say
have to
that
wait
the
out the process.
sellers, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Would you say that the sellers are the ones that maybe are in a more difficult position, or buyers?
It really depends on the situation. I mean, some sellers, if they're looking to move to another place, maybe in the same situation as the buyer on the place they're selling. And so there may be a domino effect. I've had some sellers get really uptight because they want to make sure they close so that they can go ahead and purchase another property. I've had other sellers that say, I'm okay with whatever happens, because I haven't made plans. I wasn't ready to move out just yet, or I'm not prepared to take the next step. So if this falls through, it's okay for me. Buyers, on the other hand, depending again on their situation, if they have a lease that's coming up, and they, obviously in New York right now, 90 days stay on evictions, but if they're, not leaving their existing location, um, they may or may not be in such a rush to go ahead and close. But I'm finding that by and large, my buyers are very interested, unless they're getting an investment property, in which case they're getting very nervous because, right now, if they're buying a six-family property, and, nobody's paying rent on day one, even
Yeah.
able to get some relief from their lender on the mortgage for some time period, they're not going to get rent, and they're not going to be able to seek recourse in the courts. That doesn't sound like a very enticing deal. So those types of buyers, I find, are getting very nervous, but my residential buyers are still very excited to move forward. And thankfully, although I do have a lot of clients that are self-employed, I think a lot of my self-employed clients that are buyers are being pretty resourceful and seem to be ready to weather the storm. I mean, this has to end at some point, and all of us
Yes.
hoping that at that some point that things, like a rubber band, kind of, we just get like such a crazy amount of work and activity because we're all stir crazy and we're all dying to get back into the marketplace, that we make up for this, this dismal couple of months.
Yeah, well, I don't do real estate, so I don't exactly have my finger on the pulse of what you are dealing with as a real estate attorney. Is there anything else that you think is relevant that would help our viewers?
Sure. I mean, I think that, to the extent that you've been right now, there's no reason to stop looking. I mean, obviously, you can't go to open houses, but most realtors do a really good job of putting a lot of information on the listing itself. And you can certainly, I'm not encouraging anybody to go out there unnecessarily, but you could certainly do a drive by. I mean, if you want to look at neighborhoods and you kind of know where you think you want to be because of its proximity to schools or work or highways or shopping or whatever it is, I mean, you can still continue to narrow your search in that way, even without your realtor alongside you. There's no reason why you can't make offers, negotiate. I mean, things can still be done without having to physically be in the space with another person. So, don't and rates right now, my understanding is they're pretty darn good. So if
Might
you're
be the time to buy.
right, so there, I don't see the reason not to take advantage of that. Especially, for example, you'd already done some shopping, you'd seen, a good number of places, and you were kind of narrowing your choices and your options. I don't see any reason why somebody should stop unless they have a real concern about their finances, with moving ahead and making an offer.
Excellent. Well, we're trying to encourage people to, as much as possible, continue to live their lives, not just put everything on hold and, sit on the couch. So
Right.
thank you for that information. So if you want to buy or sell, it doesn't sound like there's any real obstacle to that, except for, maybe some financial difficulties that you mentioned.
Right.
So how can people reach you, Jessica, if you could be of assistance to them?
Sure. You can go on my website. It's www.jessicasanchez with a Z law.com. You can email me at jessica@jessicasanchezlaw.com. You can reach out to me by phone at 914-374-2073. And you can also shoot me a text. I do a lot of work with people all around the world, and we do it via WhatsApp, we do it via Skype, we do it via Zoom, we do it via, whatever
Doing
works.
more of that.
Exactly. Exactly. So there really, I mean, not much has changed in terms of the transaction moving ahead. The only thing, the only times when I meet with clients in the real estate world is, one, I always meet with them when I first meet with them and we're reviewing the contract, but we can do that remotely. Okay. And then two, at the closing table, and sometimes that doesn't even happen because, like I said, sometimes they just give me power of attorney and I sign on their behalf. Still doesn't need to happen anymore. I can go through all of the documents ahead of time, assuming that the lender provides them to me, and most of them right now are working within those confines. And we can go through any issues, questions, concerns, that they have without having to physically be in the same room. So there's a lot that can be done here. I know that some people like to have the physical interaction, and I'm a people person, so I appreciate that. But if somebody is desirous of moving forward with the deal for whatever reason, they shouldn't feel like it's impossible right now, because that's certainly not the case.
Yep, that's absolutely the message that we want to get out there. What geographic region do you cover in New York?
Uh, Downstate. So my closings are range all the five boroughs: Long Island, Westchester, Dutchess, and Putnam sparingly, but predominantly Westchester, Bronx, the city, Queens, and Brooklyn. I would say those are where the bulk of my transactions take place.
Okay, so you heard it. If anybody needs Jessica's help, particularly in those areas, then I encourage you to reach out to her. Thank you, Jessica, for your time today.
Yes, stay well, stay healthy, everybody.